Welcome to this particular presentation. My name is Nguwi. I'm going to take you through a presentation on staff capacity assessment or skills audit. We'll go through all the things that you may need to do in order for you to be able to carry out a skills audit or a staff capacity assessment, whatever term we want to use for doing that. This particular audio, I'm sure it's being recorded. Let me just check that it's being recorded. I will stop sharing for now just to check if it's being recorded so that we can have yeah, it's being recorded. That's good. Okay, so sorry for that. I just wanted to be sure. Okay, so let's start with staff capacity assessment. Maybe we start with I just want to find out from you, maybe through the chat box. What is your understanding of when you say you are doing skills audit? What exactly are you doing? If you can put it in the chat room so that we can have a starting point. What is your understanding of skills audit? Or if you do capacity, if you use the term capacity assessment, what is your understanding of that? If you can share. Please share if you can. What is your understanding of yeah, maybe let me not ask that particular question. There is another one that I want to ask. Maybe let me ask it differently. The question is that why do you think some people fail to perform in their jobs? Even if you reflect on your own organization, there are some people they've got the qualification, they've got the experience, at least on paper, but they still fail to deliver. What could be the reason? Okay, continue sending. I can see there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Keep them coming, keep them coming, keep them coming, keep them coming. Okay, lack of training, lack of skills, lack of adequate skills. Okay, that's fine. You can keep on putting your comment there. Maybe let's move on to let's start maybe by looking at what a skill is. Even if you go into the dictionary or anywhere you want to go, Wikipedia, you'll find that there's a definition of a skill. Okay, so a skill is those expertise, talent, and assets that make someone deliver on a particular task or a job. And these assets, fortunately, they reside within the individual. So the skill is what you possess that actually makes you deliver on a particular job. That's what you call a skill. And these assets reside within an individual. I know there is a confusion that normally happens when people equate qualification and experience to skill. There is a big difference there, as you will see as we go through this presentation. The skills refers to the specific abilities, knowledge, and expertise that individuals possess and utilize to perform tasks and solve problems in their particular roles. That's another way to look at that. Let's look at this. I highlighted this deliberately. When you look at this, you realize that a skill can be acquired, okay, through education, through training, and practical experience. A skill can be acquired through education, through training, and the practical experience. So when you look at that, you will notice that most people, when they're doing a skills audit, they go and edit the education, they go and edit the experience, which is a means to acquiring to the skill. So they will then say, okay, they are qualified, so they must have the skill. They've got the experience, so they must have the skill. In practical terms, that does not help that much. But I know even where we've done skills audit or capacity assessment ourselves, we've noted that people still prefer for us to audit the education and experience as part of the assessment. But what we have done in doing that is we have weighted the contribution of education and experience. The surprising thing is that people don't audit the training, maybe that we have received. For example, what workshops we have done and things like that. But I want to again re-emphasize, this is a very important slide, emphasize that education, experience, education is represented by qualification, experience is represented by the number of years of experience someone has been in a particular role. All these, they represent the means to acquiring the skill. They are actually not the actual skill itself. It's a means to acquiring the skill. So let's take that into context. Then capacity, staff capacity is the ability to perform the job related tasks and skills. So if you look at the proper definition, staff capacity assessment, staff capacity and skill, they are almost defined in the same way. So they are actually the same. Okay. But when you then look at people who say they're doing a skills audit, they're basically doing a qualification and experience audit in most cases. They're doing a qualification and experience audit. And that is not called a skills audit. Okay, you better call it a qualification and experience audit. Our experience has shown that in Zimbabwe, for example, at least 90% of the people that are in professional roles have got the right qualification. The minimum required, at least the minimum required for that job, they do have it. The same applies with experience. Around 90%, they have the required experience for that particular job. Okay, so yeah, in some instances, you do find there are gaps here and there. For example, I've seen some audits done in councils, in other organizations, especially public organizations where these have been published, and you'll find that they always focus on the qualification to say, oh no, you know, the accountant doesn't have a degree, the accountant doesn't have this. That is not a skills audit, it's a qualification and experience audit. There's nothing wrong with doing a qualification and experience audit, but remember, the qualification and experience are the means to acquiring the skill. So if you depend on the qualification and experience as a proxy for skills, you may actually get it wrong. In some cases, you can be lucky, but in most cases, you may actually get it wrong if you use that particular process. Okay, so it encompasses the skills, the knowledge, experience, and aptitude that people possess. Okay, so an employee's capacity is determined by their qualification, their training and experience, as we already highlighted. The common approach, as I've already indicated, is to assess qualification and experience. The danger is that these are means to acquiring the capacity to do the job. They are actually not the capacity itself. This is why you find that you've got people who are qualified, you've got people who have got the experience, but still don't deliver because they don't have the skill or they don't have the capacity. But they have the qualification. Then you tick the boxes, qualification done, experience, yes, qualification, yes, but they still fail to deliver. Obviously, as we are talking about this, we are holding other factors constant. For example, we are holding issues to do with the culture of the organization, the environment of the organization. We are holding this constant because they do affect performance. They do affect the delivery. But where someone lacks a skill, it's more enduring. Where someone lacks capacity, the non-performance is more enduring. If it's just an issue of poor supervision, poor leadership, you will notice that the person can show the non-performance is not consistent. It's more transitory in the fact that it fluctuates. So that's important to take note. One of the key issues in capacity assessment is that we need to take note that jobs vary in their level of complexity. Okay, jobs vary in their level of complexity. So if you take, for example, a finance manager's job is more complex than an accountant's clerk. Okay, so if you take an accounts clerk and say immediately you are now a finance manager, that person may actually not have the capacity to perform that job. Okay, the next thing is if they don't have the capacity to perform that job, where is the capacity coming from? And that's what we will identify. Is it in the areas that can be corrected, or is it in areas that can be corrected? These are important factors to take note of. So you can't talk about capacity assessment without acknowledging that jobs vary. They've got a hierarchy of complexity from the lowest complex jobs to the highest complex job. In any job family, you've got less complex jobs going to the highest complexity in terms of the job itself. So these must be taken into consideration as you are preparing to do your staff capacity assessment. So without understanding the level of work complexity, it would be almost impossible to do a proper staff capacity assessment. So you need to be very clear in the hierarchy of the complexity of jobs, especially if you're going to be doing this for purposes of succession planning and also for purpose of identifying training needs. Others use the same approach to be able to identify training. This is a more scientific approach to identifying training needs, to identifying people who have got the capacity to succeed in certain roles and those who do not have the capacity to succeed in some roles. So when you look at complexity, Elliot Jacquet started by clearly outlining that job complexity ranges from a level of 1 to 8. There is a short study that was done by the University of Zimbabwe long back, I think around 1989, where they were comparing the levels of work as given by Jacquet versus our job evaluation system like the Patterson and the Castellan. That is still available. If you Google and just Google and say levels of work and the Patterson system, you'll find that there's a PDF document online that was done by Josephine Jordan, Theo Moyo, I think Josh Ndozia, who was once at Zimplats. They did something to compare a proper scientific comparison of the levels of work and the actual job levels as those found in the Patterson and the Castellan system. So they use the levels of work, then compared to the Patterson, compared to the Castellan. So if you are using any grading system, you can equally translate from your grading system, assuming it was done properly, into the levels of work. That is a useful cross-matrix comparison that you can use. So when you look at the levels of work, it's really about the complexity of the job. If you look at level 1, these are really routine jobs. As you go into level 8, we are managing a multi-national, that is global, with global presence almost in every continent. That's what, if you are in level 8, or if your job is in level 8. The same applies to level 7. It's a multi-business, complicated business in the presence in multiple countries. And these are normally your CEOs that go into that kind of for this. The same applies with level 6. It's a very complicated multinational. When we look at most companies in Zimbabwe, even if you go back to the matrix for comparison for comparing with the current job evaluation system, so you find that most organizations, most CEOs in Zimbabwe are at level 5 in terms of the complexity of the work that they do. They're actually at level 5. They manage not very complicated business, very simple business models with, in some cases, just in-country presence with very little regional presence. We rarely get CEOs who are managing a multinational in the sense that it's present in probably 2 or 3 continents, and they are driving that, they're managing from Zimbabwe. So that kind of complexity is what we are talking about. So that level of complexity, and if you read, you find that each one of these levels of complexity is explained in greater detail. One of the ways to find out where you belong, the easiest way, according to the originator of this kind of approach, they say that if you want to see where you are, you just look at the longest task that you work on. If your task does not, if you go back to the original table, they'll tell you if your longest task is a year, you must be in level this. If your longest task that you've worked on is 3-4 years, you must be in this level. So that's another rudimentary way of getting into to get to these particular levels. Then we also need to be clear what actually drives the performance of an individual. What actually drives the performance of an individual? According to Elliot Jacquet, 1987, after well-documented research, they came up with this particular model, which I believe in, that the cognitive ability plays a part, which is what they call cognitive power, your job knowledge, which is your technical knowledge about the job. Technical job knowledge is not anything else except that it is the technical know-how for that. If you're an accountant, do you know how to do the accounts? It's not just accumulated knowledge. It's how do you know how to do the accounts? If you are an HR person, do you know HR, for example? Do you know industrial relations? Do you know learning and development? Do you know compensation and benefits? That's what we are calling job knowledge. Does the person have the job knowledge for that particular role? Then number 3 is that the skill or competencies that are required. For those that like reading, there's a lot of research that has been done around skills and competencies. There's what is called the 8 great competencies, or the great 8 competencies. and those have been found to be enduring and predictive of performance. That's the kind of skills that you may need to measure. I know in most organizations, they have what they're calling their own competence model. The only challenge with some of these competence models is that they have not been validated. It's just people thinking, I think if you focus on customer centric, we'll be successful. If you focus on business or commercial acumen, we'll be successful. Yes, it's good hypothesis, but you must get to a stage where you validate that to say, okay, if we are going to choose communication or whatever other competence you have as one of the major competencies that we want to track as an organization at various levels, do people who possess that do well in their jobs? Because if there's no connection, it's actually wasting your time. You need to make sure that whatever competence model that you have, it's a validated competence model. You actually collect information on what people have versus their actual job performance so that you can validate it. There's a lot of money that has been wasted with people focusing on competence models that are redundant, that actually add no value. You spend money assessing them, you spend money developing people in competencies that may actually not add much value to your organization. Then there's, in terms of performance, capacity to do the job, there is also the motivational aspect that is there. Very difficult to assess. When you're doing the skills audit or capacity assessment, we rarely assess that. But in some cases where we've got the opportunity, we use values as a proxy to that. Then we also have the personality issues. Number 5, what in their model they call it wisdom. The personality issues we are saying, yes, there are personality characteristics that are required for someone to be successful. For example, conscientiousness predicts performance across all jobs. You would need to make sure that that is assessed. Other personality traits, they don't add that much. But if they are in the negative, for example, if someone is a highly neurotic, it tend to derail them. It affects them because they can't build relationships with other people. They've got very difficult a time coordinating and collaborating with others. So that constrains their performance. All this is assessed as part of your capacity assessment. Okay, then the 6 is just in relation to a task. You're assessing capacity in relation. When you say the R is the capacity, is the level of complexity that we're talking about. So you're assessing someone's capacity in relation to the level of complexity of the job. So it can't just be assessment. It has to be in line with what is required in that particular job for someone to deliver in the job of interest. You can read more. Elliot Jacquet wrote a few books that they're very difficult to find, especially online. But if you go on Amazon, there are books that are there that is written. It's done a lot of work as well on the organizational restructuring, actually your organograms. What is the model for designing your organograms rooted in a particular research? So in summary, when you look at this is the embodiment of a skills audit or a capacity assessment. I know some people will say, okay, let's just go to the skill. Where the skill in this case is just the competence. Because the word skill is misused. But the correct definition is what we talked about. Okay, is everything that you need that reside within an individual in order for them to be able to deliver performance. That's the skill. Or alternatively, you could use capacity assessment as an alternative term to use on that. So when you look at that, you notice that most people will then just say the skill. And as you can see, when you are doing a proper capacity assessment, there's no way you are seeing the qualification. There's no way you are seeing the experience there. Because there are means to acquiring the skill for you to be able to do the job. But I know in practice, people love that. So when you are doing capacity assessment, we end up including that. There's also an interesting model that was done by Raw, which looks at the foundation of the skills that we're talking about. When you look at this pyramid, you notice that they're saying that just like Jacquet, the foundation is what we call the ability and the personality and other characteristics. If you look at that, the abilities, you are basically looking at your cognitive abilities, then your personality traits. Those two affect your knowledge, how you can acquire the knowledge. If you don't have the right cognitive ability, it will be difficult for you to acquire the right knowledge that you require. Then the skills, as you can see, these are now the competencies. Not the technical, sorry, the technical skills that you can have. Then the attitudes, they are all coming from your abilities and the personality traits that we have. Okay, so if someone doesn't have the abilities and the right personality traits, it will be difficult for them to acquire knowledge, especially coming from abilities. It will be difficult for them to acquire skills. Their attitude will probably be terrible as a result of personality that is coming there. Then at the top there, you can then find your competencies, your communication, and many other things that you find there. You'll find that these the competence that we're talking about, for example, if your organization got a particular competence model, they are at the top. It's actually the roof of the. So if you just go and focus on assessing the competence, you may actually not get the full picture in terms of whether someone has got the skill or not for a particular job. So you need to make sure that you have got a holistic picture. I know sometimes it's a cost, sometimes it's an issue of time, and people take a shortcut when they're assessing the competencies. So instead of taking a shortcut, if you really want to do something that is thorough, it means you need to do it holistically. If you either you call it a skills audit, capacity assessment, that's okay. Or in some cases, people do what is called a scientific assessment of training needs for the organization. This is the approach that you use. Or you want to prepare people for succession planning, you can also use the same model in terms of the definition, the model for identifying what capacity means, the model for identifying what skills requirements are required for a particular job. When I look at some of the succession plans, when I look at some of the training needs probably is the worst part that it is not done very well, simply because people do not understand what a skill is. People do not understand what capacity is. So what they do is that they then go and do a shortcut and call it a training needs assessment. They go and do a shortcut and it says a succession planning readiness assessment. They go and do a shortcut and call it a skills audit. And what you are doing when you go that route, you are just changing your organization because you're not doing it thoroughly. The value that you can get from doing it properly is immense. Imagine if you may not do it for everyone. You can identify what you're calling your high value key roles. In those high value key roles, you then say, look, let's assess the people that are currently there, if they've got the capacity to do the job. Let's also go and assess the people that may aspire to go into those roles if they've got the capacity to aspire to be able to function in the role, in the higher role. Okay, so after doing that, when you've done your capacity assessment, you will notice that, let me just look at this example. You can see, as I indicated, you always plot your capacity in relation to the level of work complexity. So the work complexity is on your extreme left. Then at the bottom, you've got the level of capability of the job holder, the capacity that the individual has. So if you look here, let's look at number one. These are individuals. This could be names. If you are mapping your skills capacity assessment, you map it in this way. So number one there that you are seeing is we could call them the person John. So when you look at John, you can see that John is in green because John is at the right level in terms of work complexity, the role that they're holding. They've got the right capacity at L3. So it's a green. Then we look at, let's call them Sam, number two. The role that they're holding is at level, complexity level 5, which is a CEO, general manager kind of role. But their level of capacity is level 2, which is a foreman level role. So they're holding a role where they have no capacity. They actually, what tends to happen in such kind of a situation is that this Sam, because they have no capacity to hold that role, they feel the stress, they are pressurized, you know what you feel when you're incompetent for a particular role, or you have no capacity. That kind of mental pressure that you feel is the same. So this person is feeling this kind of pressure. What then tends to happen is that they bring that role down to level 2. Remember, this role is at level 5 capacity complexity. So, but the same does not have the capacity. So same will bring that role to a foreman level, which is where their capacity is, level 2. They'll bring it down. Just look around in your own organization. I'm sure you've seen people that you've promoted, put in certain roles, but you find they're not doing what they're supposed to do at that role. They're not value adding at that role because they actually relapsed back to their old role. Okay? Just to give you an example, if you've got a CEO who is supposed to operate at level 5, but they've got capacity of level 2, you may find this CEO, instead of focusing on strategic directional issues for the organization, they are focusing on whether who is coming to work late, who is drinking more tea, who is, the routine, mundane office kind of stuff. It's already showing you that they have no capacity. It's actually hot there. In Shona would say, kuno pisa kwa wanenge wari job racho kumsoro ku level 5. Kuno pisa. So they go down to level 2 where it's much cooler because they can handle things that are at level 2 level. That's what you find. Then you look at the level, employee number 3. We call them Gladys for now. So GLAD is at level 3 in terms of job complexity. The role is level 3, which is a foreman, team leader kind of level. But you find GLAD has got the capacity for level 5, which is the general manager, CEO level. Okay? The challenge with GLAD is that they may end up being ineffective because they are just overcapacitated. They've got the capacity that is much higher than what is required for that particular role. And also, if you don't look after them, they're likely to exit. These are the people that you target for succession planning. The GLAD is the number 3. These are the kind of people that you target for succession planning. But the danger of keeping them there is that they may actually eventually be poached by someone, or they leave out of frustration in that particular role. So there is low retention, low job satisfaction, complicated, ineffective decision making that can happen there, and also naturally burnout that can happen there. Then, what triggers a skills audit in an organization? What triggers a skills audit is most of the time when an organization is going through very difficult situation or performance issues, they always say, could it be that, remember, before you even attribute your poor performance as an organization to lack of skill or talent, it's a hypothesis that you're making, you must prove it, that it's actually coming from there. So poor organizational performance can be caused by a number of factors. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a lack of talent, it could be other issues. But we can conclude that it's talent in the sense that even if there is no market for your product, the market is very difficult, it's complicated, we expect that the people that they have employed must find a way. That's what we call capacity. They must find a way around the problem. So people with capacity to find a way to find a problem. Then also what triggers skills audit in some instances where you've got qualified and experienced people, but the organization is still performing, is still not performing, or the employees in those roles are actually not performing regardless of them being holders of the qualification and the experience that is required. In some instances, you find audit picks that someone doesn't have the qualification for a role, and it triggers a massive skills audit, what in quotes what we are calling a qualification audit, which is actually in a true sense not a skills audit. That's another area that we normally find. In some instances, it's triggered by succession planning and the need for long-term planning for the organization. Basically, a disaster kind of recovery program that is happening in that kind of situation. So that kind of situation is normally happens, and as you would be aware, most companies in Zimbabwe don't have a succession planning to talk about, those that have been approved by the board. And in some instances, it's triggered by people who want to identify training needs, because it's a more scientific approach to identifying training needs. We've already talked about the complexity of the jobs and how we get there and the level of work. I will not go back again to there. But before you go to actually doing the actual skills audit, you may also want to understand the jobs themselves through a proper job analysis. Most of the job analysis that we do in our organization is incumbent driven, and people tend to exaggerate what they're doing. People tend to put things that they don't, that they want, which is not necessarily what is required for someone to do a job properly. All these things can actually mislead the organization into investing in areas that are actually not priority areas, because people then put what they want. I'm sure you've heard about what is called KSOs, which means knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics. These need to be identified for every job as part of your capacity assessment. It's the preliminary work that you do for each job. It's actually the preliminary work that you do in each job. So you identify the knowledge that is required, is fitting into what we talked about earlier on. What are the skills required in this particular role? What are the abilities required in this particular role? What are other characteristics required in this particular role? Which means they're all there basically standing for the competence that are required. Very easy to do. This is how you do it. For example, we call this a job responsibility and KSO matrix. For example, we are looking at a bank teller here. For example, you look here, their job responsibilities: count money and give to clients. What skills, what are the KSO required? This person will need a bit of quantitative reasoning. They will need attention to detail. They will need the ability to read, and things like that for that particular competence. So you do it by key responsibility. Then you go to explain to clients any queries that they may have. This is the bank teller. What skills, what KSOs are required. We say they need to interact positively with clients. We have put an X there to indicate that it's required. they need to work under pressure. Both these clients could be many of them. You can see there, we also put an X to indicate that is required. So you can do this for any job. Then balance all transactions at the end of the day. You can see there, they need numerical reasoning. They would need attention to detail. They will need the ability to read. So eventually you'll be able to identify the KSOs. It's actually dangerous to go and proceed and do a skills audit without understanding the KSOs for each particular role. Your normal job description that you do, sometimes it's not done properly, not thoroughly, as I've already indicated. The biases that are there are probably not reflecting what the role is all about in terms of profile. What we find is that most job descriptions are done at the time of doing a job evaluation. And you know the danger with the incumbent-driven job descriptions, people tend to inflate these. And if you are going to do your capacity assessment on the basis of inflated duties, wrong duties, you may end up identifying the wrong KSOs for that particular job. Okay, so if we were then to assess, let's say we are assessing the capacity for a bank teller, I have not done everything, which means we will need to make sure that we assess their numerical reasoning as part of their capacity. We need to check if they've got the attention to detail. We need to check if they're good, their ability to read. We need to check if they're good, their ability to interact with clients, which is basically client relationship. We need to check if they can work under pressure. These are the KSOs required. And we then allocate the weights that are required for each one of them in order to get a capacity score for them out of 100. What is the capacity score for that particular individual? Then the next step is what is called a KSO method matrix. KSO method matrix. Remember the KSO: knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics, and take other characteristics to represent other competencies that are required for that particular role. So we have identified for the bank teller that they need numerical reasoning. We've identified that they need attention to detail. We've identified that they need the ability to read, interact with clients, and work pressure. What are the methods that we are going to use to assess them? Okay. For example, numerical reasoning, we have to give them a numerical reasoning test. Attention to detail, we can give them attention to detail test. Verbal reasoning, we can give them a verbal reasoning test. These are just examples. It could be other things. Then structured job interview to assess how they interact with the clients. You could also use assessment centers where they do role playing. Okay. Then work under pressure, you can do this, assess this through personality or through role plays where they have to handle very different clients. The methods are many, but when you are choosing your methods, try to lean more towards those that have been validated scientifically, so that you don't waste the company's money or resources doing an assessment that is not proper assessment, because the results get affected by the method that you use. So going back here, remember, sorry, the job responsibility KSO matrix, very key. And the second one, the KSO method matrix, very key, because it now takes you to the method for assessing that. Okay, so having done that, I want to explain other terms that are important as we go through this presentation. Remember, I had already highlighted that if an individual has sufficient capacity, they will tend to get the work done and most of the time in budget. Individuals with excess capacity tend to get work done earlier and under budget. We have already talked about the cognitive capacity. There is what is called the current operating level. If you really want to use the technical term that Elliot Jacquet was using when doing capacity assessment, there's what they call a current operating level. You need to take note of this. The current operating level, this is where an individual's position is normally it's not a choice, but this is where the organization decided to put it. So it's an assigned. We take John and say, John, you're now the finance manager. We have assigned to John, and we have assumed they've got capacity for that role. It's called the current operating level. Okay? This level is an assigned capability, which may not be a true reflection of the potential, which could be at another level other than this. So assigned current operating level is, we are saying you're a finance manager, but that person could actually have the capacity to be the CEO. So the current operating level is an assigned capacity. Okay, then current actual capability. What is the individual's capability to function in that particular level where they have been assigned? Okay, this is a function of the thing that we have talked about, the cognitive ability, the experience, job knowledge, and competence that we have talked about. You assess that, and you can then say, okay, your assigned capacity, which is your current operating level, Then current actual capacity, which is we call CAC, which is CAC. Then future current potential capability. That's the next one. That's the maximum level at which someone could work at the present time, given the opportunity to do so, and the opportunity to acquire the necessary skills and knowledge. This is an aspirational level. We are not yet there. When people work at their CPC, they feel they have an opportunity for full expression. People grow or shrink their roles and tasks to their current level of capacity. I think we covered that. Then there's what is called the future potential capability. This is the maximum. At that level, that person can't exceed that level. The maximum level at which a person will be capable of working at some time in future, say 5 years from now, 10 or 15 years from now, a maximum at which a person will be capable of working given all the development that is necessary. So you're saying if you develop this person, they can actually move to their future potential capability. So when you're doing your capacity assessment, depending on what the client wants or what you want, you could assess all the three of them. So we start with the current operating level. This is John. We're assessing John. We put the current operating level. We put the current actual capability. We put the current potential capability, CPC. We then put future potential capability. All these can be identified. And it will give you pointers as an organization to whether there is capacity for them to go into other higher level roles. That's important. So let's look at a sample. Now that we've done the capacity and everything, a summary, this is what we use. You can also use whatever you prefer in terms of coding. So you can actually code this to say someone has got a high capacity, someone has got a moderate capacity, and it's yellow. Where there's limited capacity is red. We have avoided using no capacity, although I've seen other reports elsewhere globally where there is no capacity. Limited capacity means there is a potential to bridge the gap somehow. But we know there are other people where there is no capacity at all, even for the role that they're in and for the future roles. You can also do that. I don't know what color we can use besides red for that particular. So the summary capacity for the whole organization will look like this. It will show you the average capacity for the organization at 43%, which means there is a gap of 57%. Okay. And when you look at this at a very high level, when your capacity is below 50%, it's very likely this organization is in trouble. Performance-wise, there's no doubt about that. Even where we've done capacity in some cases, just by looking, even if you don't tell me the organization, just give me the people, you can tell you whether the organization is in safe hands or not, just by looking at the capacity. We would expect that ideally you should be averaging capacity of 70% and above. If you are really, but also if you find, when you find this level of capacity, most of the time it's the challenge with the hiring. Maybe when the organization started, people were just being brought in, no assessment done, or no serious assessment done, or the bar was set too low just to get the people, bodies basically in roles, bodies with no capacity in those roles, just to say there's someone. If it's a finance manager, you just take anyone who has passed through a finance department, whether they have the capacity or not, is something else. That's where you get. So if you find that your organization is averaging capacity across all departments of about 43%, it's very likely that organization is already in trouble. So we then go to, remember what I said, ideally if I had the opportunity, I would not assess qualifications, but in this particular instance, we did assess qualifications. This is actually a true organization, but we used the sample, we took out all the other details. It's not a very big organization, but it's a true organization. So total average weighted capacity score for by qualification, you find that on qualification, this organization is actually at 98% capacity with a gap of 2%. So all the people that are in the role, they've got the minimum qualifications required for that particular role. Then you go to experience again, 100%. Everyone that is in a role, they've got the minimum experience required for that particular role. So there's no gap there. But this organization was still in serious trouble, struggling for a consistent period of about 3 years. When we did the assessment, they were struggling. Given the resources, still they were not performing. Get funding from the shareholders, still they were struggling. And when we then went deeper to say, okay, let's look at the cognitive capacity as part of the assessment, we found the 33% with a capacity gap of 77%. Then when we looked at what we call the personality score, which we call a derailer in other reports, we found that they were derailed to the extent that of 65%, which is the opposite when you switch those. with that kind of capacity only of 45%, with a derailment score of 65, it's an index of 65%. So you can see, if you go back to that pyramid, you can see the foundation for this organization is weak. They've got qualified, experienced people with no capacity in the areas that matter, because your cognitive capacity plays a big part in terms of predicting performance. The competencies in this case, we then said, okay, as the next stage, we can then assess the competence. But it was after just going through this, they said, I know it's not even necessary. We know these are the gaps that are there. And the good thing about this particular case study is that when we're now discussing with the board and other people and the executive, they confirmed that only for this one we knew. It's actually showing for this one, especially when you go to individual. This one we knew they were not performing, just didn't have the data. This one we know they are not doing very well. This one, basically validating, say yes. This one, okay. They're struggling in those roles. Then the weighting, you need to be very careful when you're doing the weighting for the scores. Don't put too much weight on the qualification and experience, given what I have already, the background that I have given you. Cognitive ability, 16. Personality development, 15. If you factor any competencies, you must go back to what is called the grade 8 competencies. Look at the contribution to performance that contributes. It's not too much. It's less than 15% in terms of contribution. But you're weighting, if you mismanage the weights, you can actually come up with a very wrong and misleading report. So you can go deeper and then look at the department themselves. In this case, you can see the only department where there was capacity for this particular organization was HR and IT. And these people were then brought in to professionalize the business, the organization. In the other core areas, the organization was struggling. Finance, struggling. Banking, struggling. Business development, no capacity. And when you look at that, you can already tell why this organization is not performing, because of lack of capacity. Even if HR was to do wonders, they were not going to be able to correct this problem. The only correction that they could do was to start hiring people on merit and bring in the right people with the capacity. But what do you do with the people that we have? And things like that. IT was doing their best, very robust kind of IT platform, well managed, no downtime, but no business coming. And the banking side, poorly managed, high levels of non-performing loans. Money is channeled, resources are channeled to the wrong areas because the people have no capacity for banking. So that kind of situation is what you find. And when you look at that, you can already tell that this organization is in trouble. If you go back to this, the challenge that you're going to face to address this organization, especially this particular one, yes, there are pockets of people who would have capacity. So it's not the overall, yes, it's showing for department, but even in those departments where the department is in red, there were people that were in green. So it's good news. But for example, if you then discover that someone doesn't have the cognitive ability and the personality makeup for the roles that they're in, the challenge that you will have, these are less amenable. If you're going to invest in improving cognitive ability, it will take you ages, it will take you lots of money, because it's largely hereditary. This is largely hereditary and partly child with experience. So yes, some people try to say, yes, we can try. If you look at MESA, for example, when I was looking at one of the MESA model for identifying capacity, if you can find it, they clearly state that this can be corrected. Even if you go into research, if you want to correct it, you are going to spend lots of money, but probably you are going to get an extra percentage improvement, not much improvement that is going to happen. So this person effectively is a wrong hire. When you find that they've got the qualification, they've got the experience, but they are still not delivering, it's a wrong hire that you identify there. So that's the kind of picture that you get after doing a capacity assessment. Obviously, the reports are much more detailed than what I have summarized here. Okay. Then, if you do want to get to do assessment on the competencies, we do advise you to make sure that the job profiles are done properly, like what we're doing with the teller, and also your other characteristics are actually reflected there, so that you can see how you can assess them. So you must determine the required competencies. The best way to determine the required competencies, especially those that are valuable to the organization, is to use what are called subject matter experts. for profiling rather than using the individuals themselves. That is key to understanding. We did a big project for case back for their two operators using this kind of model. We basically from start to finish, from capacity assessment, all the things that we're talking about there. Your KSO model, KSO method matrix, we did all that, and we found very interesting results that we then offered to the client for all their till operators. So you can actually develop this competency model. Once you have done the competency modeling, assuming it has been done properly, my worry is that most of the time it's not done properly. Assuming it has been done properly, how do you then assess those competencies? You can use role plays, you can use in-basket exercise, leaders group discussion, presentation. In some cases, you can use 360-degree assessment as a supplementary to assessing the competencies. The key issue is that it's more expensive to go the assessment route. So sometimes it's better to limit this to your high-level roles, those roles targeted for succession, your high-valuable roles. You can then do your graduate trainees because you want to develop them for the future. You can use your role play, in-basket, leaders group discussion, presentation, and the 360 assessment, especially for those that have been in the company for a while. Then on assessing technical know-how, which you can see, I skipped in my report there, I skipped it, because sometimes when you go to a client and say, look, let's do a full capacity assessment, they say sometimes the resources are not available, especially the monetary resource to be able to run such kind of a project. So what they do is they say, look, let's skip the technical know-how. We will use the qualification as a proxy, but we know, as I explained earlier on, the qualification is just a means to acquiring the technical knowledge or the job knowledge. So you can use what I call the qualification as a proxy, but not very useful. You can actually use job knowledge tests. Like, for example, if you're assessing IT people, you actually give them a programming project. If you're assessing accountants, you actually give them an accounting project for them to do for a full day. Then you assess that. Others want to use technical knowledge. They want to use actual performance ratings as a proxy for technical knowledge. The danger with that is that most of the time, performance ratings are unreliable because they have not been done properly. Other people, what they do, they use subject matter experts as well to assess whether someone has got a technical knowledge. But this is almost feeding into your assessment center. You can actually do an assessment center or where you're doing presentations just to assess technical knowledge using the subject matter experts. But the problem with using presentations, for example, role plays to assess technical knowledge is that people can fake that kind of technical knowledge because they can just research. But if you are giving someone an actual simulation to check their job knowledge, you get more value out of it. Then at the end, you have done all this. You have assessed the individuals, you've done the assessment. If you've got performance records, your capacity score is what we're calling the potential score here. This is just for convenience. That's what we call the potential score here. So you put it on the extreme left. Then if you want to create a performance management system, you can put it there. Then you can then populate the people who are our feature leaders. Who qualifies to be the feature leaders? Who qualifies to be the stars? Who qualifies to be the rockets, solid talent, puzzle, fish out of the water, that kind of person, red flags, professionals, and the masters. And that you can then use that to make futuristic decisions about those individuals. So if we're presenting to you as a client, we would then put, where it says feature leader, there will be Yokai, there will be John, there will be Sam there will be Brian. Those are actual names. You go to your masters, there could be Selena, there could be Samson in the masters. In the red flag, you could find another John there and another Gladys there. So it's actual names, and you can split it either for the whole organization or you can split it by departments. That makes it easy for you to then make informed decisions about what do we do given this kind of scenario for the organization. What do we do? Recently, we were presenting for a client somewhere else outside the country. After we did the capacity assessment, we started presenting to the executive team. Then we were given an opportunity to present to the board, and everyone confirmed. In actual fact, in the board meeting, we then discovered some of the information that we had not even been given. For example, say, this one, okay, why is this whole department in red? Then we then showed them what is the problem. But we're not aware that this is what is happening and things like that. But such an important department can't have this kind of situation. It was an eye-opener for the board, actually, to be able. They asked so many questions. but we gave them the data as we had assessed, and it was confirmed by the executive that that was actually the situation on the ground. Once you have done that, you are done with your capacity assessment. I tried to do an abridged version so that we all know what is required. Okay. I will take questions at this stage. Thank you. You can just ask, or if you want to raise your hand, it's up to you, or you can put in the chat room. We can answer these questions. Will moderate capacity relate to sufficient? When someone has got moderate capacity, it means they can be trained to increase their capacity significantly. Anyone with moderate capacity, we say they are trainable. Okay, so any questions? Any questions? How often would you recommend the succession plan to be reviewed? Most of the time when you've done your initial assessment, you do annually. Because remember, once you've done the initial assessment, you are now checking progress, whether people are reaching the level of competency or the level of capacity that you require. So every year you check, at the end of each year, you check whether people have... normally the checking is not checking the capacity at this stage. You are checking the development areas that they've done. So if your succession plan is running and the people have got a 3-year time horizon for development, or a 4-year, 5-year, every year you then say, this person was supposed to capacitate in this area. Have they done it? And you tick. But at that stage, remember, you must then still validate your assessment at some stage at the end of the period to see if the people are at the right level of capacity to be able to be then entrusted to run for a particular higher level role. That's what you do. Documentation of capacity development after realizing gaps in any templates. Yes, we do have templates that we use. Once you have the documentation is there, we prepare a report first, and also the template that we use. Can you give examples of real-world organizations that are leading in this area? There are many of them. Globally, obviously, in the local organization, the ones the way we've assessed capacity, we can't give that information. But for leading organization, Google is doing very well, and Apple in that capacity, in terms of capacity assessment. They do very well in terms of that. For Apple, if we look at the book called, I don't know, I can't remember the exact title of the book, where Tim Cook is actually telling us that the way they are trying to reduce the level of capacity gaps that they find in their employees, that they are very thorough when they hire people. They say they don't want to spend on training to bridge a gap that a person should have brought already capacitated. For example, if someone is supposed to do programming, surely they must know programming before you even hire them, rather than you spending money to capacitate them. So Apple said they were not going to do that. When we hire, we're hiring a person with that capacity already. When we are capacitating people, we're capacitating them on new things, new developments, and more high level kind of thing. You can't bring in someone to capacitate them to do the job that you have already hired them to do. But in Africa, we hire incompetent people, then we spend money capacitating them. That's the challenge that we face. In terms of the HR value chain, where will capacity assessment fit in acquisition? Capacity assessment, if let's take, for example, from the sourcing of the talent. If you are sourcing the talent, it has come into your organization, and we're assuming at this stage, perfect talent. And it's very well, they're capacitated, the right capacity for the job. Capacity assessment then chips in when you want to identify people for succession planning. That will be the only major area where you're going to do capacity assessment, because you want them to go into higher level roles. Because they came in, for example, someone came in as an accountant, you now want to assess if this person has the capacity to be a finance manager or an FD for the future. That's where it comes in, assuming you have hired the right people at the beginning. But in most cases, you find people hire the wrong people, then they spend money trying to assess their capacity, they spend money trying to capacitate them. They spend money trying to capacitate people who can't be capacitated, who have no ability to be capacitated, and they spend money there. And that's very wrong decisions, especially if it's coming from HR. Tinashe, I see you've got your hand up. You can ask the question.
Okay, thanks, Memory. From my end quickly, I wanted to check what has been your experience in terms of linking performance management and capacity or talent management issues in general. I've seen, or maybe I've had the challenge where we also use the 9-box rating, but when it comes now to identifying successors, so the mismatch is being that when people do performance management, someone is rated highly as a good or outstanding performer, but they do not qualify to then come as successors, or they don't have individual development plans, etc. I don't know how has been your experience in the field, and what would you recommend so
did.
that we can have an
I'll just give
effective
you an example for
and
one bank.
cohesive system in that regard.
Okay, I'll give you an example of one bank where we did the capacity assessment. Then when we now wanted to do a 9-box diagram, we then discovered the performance system was unreliable. We actually looked at their 5 performance records for 5 years and discovered that all of them, the reliability of those performance ratings, they came to 0.07, which basically is equal to 0. It was not reliable, so we could not use the 9-box diagram because the performance management system was unreliable. Again, with another big insurance company somewhere else, we discovered that out of the 6-year period that we're given in terms of performance records, we found when we put the records together to check reliability, we found that it was also close to 0. But what we then did is, this is Mr. Zumuya and myself, but this was mainly done by Mr. Zumuya. He then checked to see if there was any year that was standing out as a more reliable than the others. We then discovered one year which was very reliable, and there was a reason that was given why it worked very well for that particular year. That's the one that we then used to approximate the 9-box diagram for the individuals. So yeah, you're right. The biggest hurdle for any organization is performance is not being measured. That's the truth. And performance is not being measured properly and recorded properly. So if you go into an organization, in one organization, we're doing an audit, we found that people that were rated as a very good performance, they were actually not good performance. When you go, both the audit then went a step further to say, let's validate with evidence where someone was rated on each item that they were rated as a good performance or poor performance. The auditors, proper auditors, not HR auditors, the auditors, your auditors, they requested for actual evidence, and they discovered that there was none in most cases, and the manager couldn't justify why they gave someone a 5, which was the highest, and the manager couldn't justify why they gave someone a 1, which was the lowest. They couldn't, even for the most recent performance management, performance rating, they couldn't. So HR professionals got a big job. I would be surprised if there's anyone in this particular session who says they've got a working performance management system. Most of the people don't have. They've got something called performance management in name, but in actual real value contribution, 0. Any other question? Is it applicable to small companies? Yes, it is. It is applicable. In actual fact, probably the impact is more dire for small companies. It is probably more dire for small companies. Okay. Any other question? Okay, if there are no questions, thank you very much for attending. We hope we will continue to engage. Can you use psychometric assessment results if available to start the capacity assessment? Yes, you can map. The assumption that you'll be making that cognitive ability being the major predictor of performance, you can almost get to the correct conclusion in terms of the overall capacity of the person just on the basis of cognitive ability. So you can actually use that. Okay. Then if you've got any specific question that you want to send via email, most of you, I'm sure you will have my email address, but let me put it in the chat room. You can send me specific questions either via WhatsApp or on my email. Then we can then be able to share whatever we have in terms of whatever question you may have. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll let you know of our next session so that we keep on continue sharing. What you then do after that, it's entirely up to you. You can try it. I'm sure some of you have tried. You can try it on your own. You can get help from anyone that you think will be able to help you. But I'm sure as the HR, you will have added massive value to an organization if you could correctly identify the capacities and also identify the people that can then be capacitated to be able to do the job. It will redirect your investment, especially on training. I know a lot of people just send people for training, whether they will be changed or not. Some people don't care. It's just a wish list. You just send people for training with no value to the organization. Maybe we need to move away from that and move more towards evidence-based kind of solutions for HR. And once you get there, you see even how you are be appreciated by your own colleagues. It's not complicated stuff. It's very simple stuff that you can do. Let's move evidence-based instead of just being sending people and wasting. Just imagine the amount of money that you could save. And I'm also thinking just now, reflecting and say, okay, you've got an organization with 100 people. You identify that these are the 20 high-level critical roles that is driving this particular organization. You target those and identify that each one of those has got the person with capacity. And if they don't have capacity, can they be capacitated? If they can be capacitated, what type of capacitation is required? Imagine if you can close that gap to 100% for those 20, the impact on your business in terms of performance will be massive. And that's the kind of thing that you should be talking to your board about. Okay, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.